This week, Juliet Okafor from RevolutionCyber has a story to tell about why sometimes good CISOs build bad security programs. Then Joseph Salazar from Attivo Networks joins us to talk about the importance of identity detection and response. Finally, in the security news, cyber insurance firm Coalition lands a $205 million Series E with a $3.5 billion valuation. Crazy numbers again this week. Risk management platform Panarrays nabs $42 million. JScrambler raises a $15 million Series A to rewrite the rules of website security. A little bit of a AppSec pun in there for folks that get that. Senson nabs $20 million for faster, more accurate cybersecurity detection and response. LG, yes, that LG, is acquiring automotive cybersecurity startups. Yeah, this one's called Cybellum. We talk about the emergence of the vendor live security status page, 386 startup postmortems, and don't forget to stick around for the squirrel story at the end. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, 78% say that working in the SOC is very painful. Yikes. On October 20th, Devo is establishing SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to you and encourage organizations to improve SOC analyst job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo as they celebrate SOC analysts around the world and provide opportunities for personal and professional development, all while you unwind with programming specifically designed to help you de-stress. You can also win a Nintendo Switch if you participate in Devo's Twitter hashtag contest. All you have to do is follow @Devo_Inc. on Twitter and tweet using hashtag SOC Analyst Day. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to sign up and learn more. The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 244, recorded on Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is Mr. Tyler Shields. Hello, Tyler.
What's up, Adrian? Coming from a slightly different location today and got some uglier headphones on, but how are you today?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, it's always fun seeing co-hosts mixing things up. We're just talking about people moving to new houses, and I'm constantly seeing new recording backgrounds and locations. It's fun.
Yeah, I got to do something a little prettier than this. It's just my ugly home office. I need like a fancy background down there. I'll get there eventually.
But no matter where you are, there are guitars in the background somewhere.
Yeah, it's mandatory, man.
How many do you own?
6 to 8, somewhere including a little guy there, a little electric ukulele.
Not sure how many guitars he owns, folks. We get a range. We get an estimate.
Yeah, somewhere in that range for sure.
We also have guest co-host standing in for Paul, Mr. Lee Neely. Hello, Lee.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about our guest today, and I'm from my usual location down in Idaho, and unfortunately I don't have any sexy stuff in the background. I just don't want to mess up the wainscoting.
I recognize the I was going to call it chair molding, but yeah. It's familiar to me.
But in any event, this is going to be fun.
Absolutely. So, quick announcement, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, our Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. So our first interview for today, how good CISOs build bad security programs. Really excited for this topic and really excited for our guest today. Juliet Okafor the CEO and founder of RevolutionCyber. Julia is a doctor of law who combines her knowledge of the legal system, with her knowledge of cyber to help her Fortune 500 clients succeed. Julia is a strategist who can turn a problem into a plan, especially when it involves people and process, which is right along the lines of what we'll discuss today. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, why would you shift away from a promising career in law to the hot mess we've got going on right now in cybersecurity? There's got to be a story there.
Oh, there's quite the story. I don't even know if we have enough time. My parents are quite disappointed in my decision. I thought I'd be an attorney, but I found the practice of law quite boring. I was good at writing briefs, but the idea that I wouldn't have the Matlock finishes made it so I didn't want to practice for the rest of my life. Got into cybersecurity, and now I practice law every single day.
Disappointed in you like you're a professional gamer, or like, I mean, what's wrong with cyber?
My background is I'm Nigerian. My parents, they gave me 4 career choices. I could either be an engineer, and that is a computer engineer, traditional, not software. I could be a professor, a doctor, or a lawyer who practices in courtrooms. I am neither of those things. And therefore, they don't know how to quantify my success. And therefore, they're not sure if they can be proud of me. So that's really what this is about. It's about whether my parents are proud of me. And they are not, and I'm okay with that.
Welcome to the therapy show. Welcome to the therapy show.
Lots of therapy. It costs me a lot per week, but it's okay. I'm getting through it.
Well, it's a good thing your parents didn't set a low bar or something on you. I mean,
Well, my father has a PhD. Actually, he has 2. So he's the one who sets the bar.
Yeah.
Dang.
Well, yeah.
Well, so, I mean, part of the point here is that legal background comes in handy, right?
Yes. The future of cybersecurity is going to require backgrounds that are non-security, non-technical. And so the combination of my skill sets are, I'm an attorney with 2 marketing degrees, and I've had at least, over 15 years in sales. So I am very knowledgeable about what it feels like to be rejected, and CISOs are rejected all the time inside organizations. So I can help them through that. But I think also fundamentally, I'm very adept at learning how to influence and helping people to do the things that they don't want to do, even when they know they should and may not be able to afford it. So the sales background, I think, has been the most helpful in my career in helping CISOs to develop the kinds of skills they need in building out security programs.
And you're in that magical position. I don't know why it is this way. Maybe you can enlighten me, but because you don't work for the company, you can say the same exact things that they've been saying till they're blue in the face. And because it comes from an outside consultant, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
And of course, the people there are like, we've been saying that for 2 years, right?
It literally is because someone wrote a check. And so they're like, someone's paying her. It's got to be that she's smart, or we agree with something she's saying. I also have the ability to not accept additional work and to say no. If you're an employee, you can leave. It tends to be a little bit more difficult, a lot more complexity. So yeah, as a third party, I'm viewed as objective, and I can speak more bluntly than I think you can from the inside.
Absolutely. So often, I think when people think about cybersecurity problems, they tend to think more, and maybe I'm projecting here, but they tend to think more about technical problems and solutions. But when I analyze breaches, and of course, my time spent on the enterprise side, the pattern there is not a lack of security products and technical controls. In my experience, it's generally that things have broken down at the people and process level. Why is it we so often see that? We see broken or ineffective processes in InfoSec.
There are several reasons. I like to identify at least 4 why we continue to see the same problems over and over again. And they're really legitimately, I think Helen Patton asked the question on LinkedIn just the other day, whether there's been a solution to any of the problems that have occurred in security in the last 15 to 20 years, and there has not been. primarily because, one, security leaders are change agents. They are not technical leaders. They are not technologists. They are designed to go into organizations and make swift, rapid change. And many of them don't see themselves as that. Secondly, many go in trying to immediately establish control and see themselves as needing to create what is a fiefdom. So I'm going to go into the organization, create all of these, teams, policies, rules, and then I'm going to exert them on everybody. And because everyone should believe in what it is I'm doing, because I was brought in by the board to get this done, then they must do it. They must do. And they tend to be either walked out of the buildings, unceremoniously fired, or, really alienated and told, not to speak in meetings that are of consequence. The third reason I find is there's a measurement of activity over outcomes. It is not important that you have so many events and incidents and you've got so many mitigations and so many frameworks and that many regulations. It is important whether you've helped the organization to meet its revenue requirements, you've met your board KPIs, you've helped the organization to meet its responsibilities to clients, you've protected the organization from so many threats. Those are outcomes rather than activities. And I think the conversation has to shift in ways that are conducive to discussion that allows for quality over quantity. I think that's really where a lot of it gets lost. And finally, there is too much congratulation of CISOs awarding themselves, self-aggrandizing, all kinds of things that they're defining success for themselves. One of the clearest ways I can tell whether CISO is successful is by asking their peers. Almost always there's disagreement about the level of success that was achieved, mostly because success is not measured by how you define yourself. It is about your ability to mobilize success for others. And if you are not able to make your peers successful, it's very likely you weren't successful. So those four things across the board end up making when I look at security programs, they are failing. But because there are echo chambers of people saying how great they are, and then the same bad CISOs or great CISOs with bad programs move from one company to another, we continue to see the same repeat habits over and over again.
It sounds like family counseling.
Yes, it does. There actually is a great deal of that.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I've trained salespeople, therapy, it kind of that way of thinking about it, like letting CISOs talk about their problems, doing a lot of listening, basically, instead of assuming what their problems are and how to fix them. I think a lot of it, in selling stuff to CISOs, but yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So yeah, the metaphor to fiefdoms, it sounds like immediately they're putting up these walls between themselves and the rest of the business.
Yes. And what we find when I talk about this idea of a moat is that the technology becomes the reason why they can't connect. Although technology is viewed often as an enabler and built as a bridge, cybersecurity leaders, I find, often use technology as a reason why they don't have to communicate. And so they aren't doing, a number of CISOs are not going out of the office to do meetings, outside. They're not having, in-person meetings, taking walks. They're not, facilitating, even via Zoom. A lot of it is, I'm going to let, the chat do the talking. I'm going to allow my email communication to do the work for me. And it is having an impact on their ability to deliver a result at the most important time that it's needed. Oftentimes, I talk about this idea of early often. The communication style is, I'm going to need political capital. I'm going to need my relationships. At the times when I'm either got my back against the wall, there's a major deadline, or this project can't fail, that's typically the time I feel like security leaders are reaching out, and it's the worst time to do so.
So what I thought I'm hearing you saying is that it's really not just sending out email blasts or IM blasts. It's yes. Building the relationship, the trust with the business, learning what's important on both sides of the table. That's actually like hard and scary for some folks, but it sounds like it's undervalued in terms of the CISO's priority list. Am I reading you right?
Yes, it is actually the most undervalued. What happens the most is huge budgets, millions of dollars are spent on technology. And then at the tail end, when all the money's spent, they'll say, I've set aside $20,000 for a communications campaign. But if the communications campaign fails, the technology won't succeed. So it's almost like there needs to be a rethinking about what it is technology is designed to do and how communication, and I talk about change management, change and driving change enables that technology to succeed. In fact, if you're working the people area and you're leveraging process, you're re-engineering it, you're working with different groups to restructure, the technology will be easier. But I think we're working backwards, and that's why we continue to get the same poor results.
I have heard of models where we put cyber professionals as not really professionals, but they're sitting in the business unit at a senior level, and their job is to interface with the CISO types to make sure that the message is heard in both directions. Is that a helpful kind of a model, or is this something that belongs more in the CISO's realm?
It is one step better. What I'll say is, I think, Adrian, you and I talk about this. So there is this desire to embed security in the business so that security has an opportunity to hear business as it's happening, to be able to respond in real time. And it actually is able to engage in that shift left model. So it is being considered earlier in the decision-making process. The challenge with the way it's being done, it's actually being done in a very hierarchical, bureaucratic way in which this person, typically a BISO, is directly reporting to the line of business leader, then directly reporting to the CISO. Those two people, the line of business leader, the CISO, they don't talk. This person now has to report to two different people. They've got to communicate now twice. They've got to speak to the people inside the team. We've just complicated their reporting structure, sometimes complicating their communication. So what we've done is place more responsibility on them, but not provided them the channels by which they need in order to make that easier. So we've solved one problem, but then created some new problems. So what we have to do actually is start to embed security within the way in which we communicate across the organization anyway. From the very beginning, when someone comes into the organization, we need to begin to train them on how their role and what the security responsibilities are within that role, and have ongoing training that's targeted towards the role. So each person has a fundamental role in security, and it's a shared model across the organization. That BISO has less responsibility to both teach, train, communicate. And I think that would be overall the best way to handle that.
So Jules, it sounds like, so who hires you here? Because it almost sounds like somebody outside the security organization could hire you, be like, we're about to fire the CISO, but we just want to stage an intervention, see if you can salvage something here, bring you in. But on the flip side, I could see a CISO hiring you to have you help them take care of everybody else because they're not the problem. And then you come in and you have to break that news to them. Does that happen?
So I've been in a situation where I was brought in by the head of cybersecurity, and I was told they weren't able to get things done because they were meeting all these obstacles. So I went in, we do what we call a cultural assessment across 5 different areas. And we met with several stakeholders, head of marketing, head of HR, head of compliance, and also met with their legal team. And each one of them had the same or similar feedback. And what it was a lack of clear communication on what the objectives were of security and understanding the overlap between security and their role and how to navigate those things. What would happen when there was conflict was that there would be a push back of the other person. So that person would be put off, and then no one would speak again. So the security leader thought they don't want to work with me, but that person said, well, they were aggressive towards me. And it turned out that there was responsibility on the security leader's part. It is very difficult to explain to someone who's hired you that they are part of the problem. In that moment, I have to remind them what their goal is and how quickly they need to show results to the organization so that they'll think less about how painful it is to have to go through that, to have to acknowledge it, and start thinking about the least tense relationship, the one that has the most likelihood to impact them and that would cause them the least frustration. And then we start to go slowly by slowly. We start to go slowly to each person, and each conversation builds more momentum and we get more support in order to get that security leader the kind of support they need. It takes a long time. I think the shortest time I've had to do some of this stuff is 6 months. But I am traditionally hired by a CISO who has the foresight to understand that they cannot go alone, especially if you're a change agent. You have to enable the people around you.
So at least they've taken a step in the right direction, right? In understanding that they need help and reaching out for that.
Yes. So it's a small window, but there's a growing number of CIOs, chief development officers, chief product officers who are bringing me in because they have a mandate by the organization for digital transformation. Almost always security must be embedded. It must be enabled, and it has to happen quickly. So when there's a rapid shift required, we're brought in to control communications, to facilitate conversations, and to determine what the outcomes are with clear KPIs.
So kind of breaking down some of the factors that you see here.
Sure.
Obviously the CISO personality themselves, company culture can be a challenge, I know, in a lot of organizations for the security team. And then it sounds like poor relationships, poor communication between them. Are there more factors, and are there some factors that you see more often than others? Obviously, there's more factors, but
there are really strong security programs in toxic work cultures. It rarely exists. Whenever I find a company that is struggling externally with reports of major lawsuits, lots of employee complaints, lots of things happening, we may not understand what's going on under the hood, but they have a hard time with building strong security programs, mostly because if you think of security as challenging most of what an organization requires, which is stability, security is always asking the organization to change. In organizations like that, they're trying to get a grasp on a handle on all the things that are changing and developing. They are the least receptive to security at that time. Almost always you see them aligned if there was recently a breach or if the security of the organization is fundamentally tied with the business model. So for instance, the Googles and the Apples of the world. But if they are not so intrinsically tied, it tends to be that the worse the work culture, the less likely the CISO will be successful in building a strong security program. The other thing, when I find organizations that outsource almost everything as a part of their culture, security tends to be a low-level priority. Not because because I have been in board meetings where the board truly believes in security. However, there requires an investment and a commitment in cybersecurity to get it right. And ultimately, when the organization believes in outsourcing, there's a cultural aspect of it where they believe in distributing responsibility to others. So I often don't see very heavily outsourced models where they have a strong security program, even if the security program has a large security employee team. And those are things I don't see correlations with, no matter the size of the company.
So are you saying that when they're outsourced, they're outsourcing their commitment as well, that it suddenly becomes put it in the box, forget about it, it's not important anymore, or something like that?
Yes. There's a heavy focus on technology, a heavy focus on service delivery through SOCs, and there's also a heavy less focus on quality of employee hiring and the way employees are treated. So they have high turnover with employees as well.
Ouch.
Yeah.
That sounds like not a great place to work.
I would say so. Which means that it will eventually become outsourced as well. Sorry, go ahead.
And when communications and relationships are so important, it very different from the fiefdom kind of situation that you described earlier when CISOs come in with that mentality. But it's still a wall. When you're outsourcing stuff like that, you're still throwing things over a wall. There's still that mentality of, oh, security is something somebody else does.
That's
right?
it. That's it. Until the bad thing happens, that's it. And you haggle over a contract, a legal piece of paper. That's not a commitment on anybody's part. I always say a contract is made in a handshake. It is made in a verbal agreement. The document is what's written down, but you've really already determined whether you're going to follow the letter of the contract before that. So whenever I see an organization, and if security goes through legal or finance and even, IT, there tends to be less commitment to it than if it goes through operations, the CEO, the CAO sometimes, and the chief risk officer. So there are patterns that continue to reveal themselves about programs. What you'll hear me say over and over again has nothing to do with the leader themselves. It almost always has to do with external factors that have that they're not in control of. One of the fallacies that we talk in security is we talk about security as though the CISO has control over it. And they really have the least control over all the other things that impact a security program. And that's why good CISOs can build bad programs, because they have the least responsibility and the least influence on whether they're good or bad.
They're a passenger.
They're just a passenger down for the ride. Yeah.
Tyler, I want to make sure you get a chance to ask questions here.
No, I mean, the human aspect of it's always a difficult problem. And relationships, I would argue, are probably the most important piece of it. I think a lot of it has to do with a CISO's approach, their overall approach and view into how they're going to build the group. I agree completely with what Jules has said to date. So, yeah, spot on.
What do you think about, though, this? Why are we seeing the billions and the millions, though, in technology investment? I just heard about the billion number. I was like, wow.
Yeah, I actually saw recently a trillions in M&A trillions number this year or something like that. And I don't know if it was just cyber M&A or global M&A. I don't remember. But either way, it's a lot of money goes into tools. A lot of money goes into building companies, building products, building vendors, right? And that's because it generates revenue and it generates money for the tool makers. It may or may not make security any better. And I've been around the security world for long enough to know that, it does make things better, but there is no tool that's an overall panacea that solves all problems. And that's why you get the whole defense in depth / expense in depth model.
Yes.
Right? It just costs a ton to fix the problems at any level of depth. And I think it's because risk is non-linear. Risk is not binary, right? You can't just go do X, fix problem, right? It's not that simple. And so you get a breadth of tools, you get a breadth of processes, you get a breadth of people that are required to solve the problem. And that's why, major banks have 3,000 to 5,000 employees dedicated to cybersecurity, right? It's just not something you can flip a switch on.
No.
And Jules, I think you nailed it earlier when you talked about the lack of focus on outcomes. The falling into this trap where you feel like you're doing stuff because you're busy. I think that's where a lot of these products come in, is they make people feel like, they put them on the treadmill, right? Like they're not going anywhere, but they're getting exercise.
And quite literally, one of the other audio books I was listening to by John Carter, what he was saying is part of the problem with technology is that the producers, the coders, everyone who builds technology is rewarded for an incremental change. As long as there is an incremental improvement on what existed before, even if you think about the agile model, as long as it's better than it was by a little bit than before, you're rewarded with millions, trillions, billions of dollars. But actually, our industry requires wholesale, rapid change. That can only be done in people and process, but that's not rewarded in the same way. Once we start to reward people for changing people, for shifting mindsets and processes in the same way we reward for technology, we will see the shift. It's why we're not seeing the shifts that we need to see in the industry.
What book was that?
It's called Changes by John Carter.
Well, it's a super interesting point. When I think back over the course of my career, and I think of markets or technologies or products or vendors that have had significant security success, they're one of two things. They tend to be human process changes, a la Microsoft in the early 2000s when they declared, hey, we're going to do security right for our business. Yep. And they started putting in tons of massive amounts of procedural and people changes to fix the problem at a broad level in their products. And things got better. So that's kind of the one storyline. The other storyline is getting ahead of it from an engineering standpoint. If we think of, and I know, again, this isn't a technology that's perfect, but the technology story could be like, hey, Apple wrote their phones in a secure manner from the get-go. And there's been, and even mobile in general is more secure than desktop. Why is that? Is that because of putting people and processes in place? This is my guess, putting people and processes in place to build that technology from the ground up as a securely designed platform? Probably so, right? So again, it gets back to having the right people in the right place at the right time to do security, both in a product manner and in a generic or generalized enterprise manner. It requires people. It requires skills. It requires human thinking. There is no tool that's going to fix everything.
I completely agree. And I think you have to have the ability to separate the maintenance of your current products from what would be the future build of a new product designed to completely approach that people process thing. Apple, I think that I was just listening to the audiobook, and they were saying the way in which change is happening with technology. I think the iPhone was able to kind of catapult within 12 years. I think the iPhone was within 3 years. Before that, it took, I think IBM, it took like 60 years. So they're basically saying like the speed of change is rapidly happening, but we're still not at a point that it's happening rapidly enough to keep up with the shift in the way humans are behaving. So until we can get ahead of it, we won't be able to see the change we need, especially on the security side. I think we think that we can't control mindsets, but marketing has figured out how to change mindsets. Think about consumers and how we buy. That's shifted substantially since at least even I was a kid. So I would say that we've got to bring some of that to the forefront, which is what I'm trying to do. How do we take marketing, neuroscience, brain research, bring it into security so we can teach people what they need to know, and they can also be part of the solution in solving our cybersecurity challenge. Yeah. And not discussing awareness, because that's another problem that we could talk about.
But you're talking about you're building an allegiance and partnership there with. You're not scaring them that their world's going to end or they're not going to be able to get their objectives met, which is really important. And we can leave the A word on the floor.
And in some ways, and I'll say this with my quiet voice, in some ways, I talk about this idea of cyber diplomacy and this idea of propaganda. If you really think about it, if you think about what marketing is designed to do, it really is about getting into subconscious thoughts and leveraging that for the purpose of action. We've got to start to do that better inside organizations for the purpose of the greater good, but in ways that respect privacy, respect people's ability to say no. That's the hard part. Is on the outside, we've agreed in ways that we allow, the marketplace to convince us to do things we don't even know we're doing. But inside organizations, there's a limit, there's a cutoff. The question is, how do we convince people that they want to do the thing that they don't know that they want to do, but we really need them to do now? And that's a whole shift in mindset from the top down. We have to have approval from the organization's board all the way through C-suite. And then we've got to keep building it into the way in which we're communicating inside the organization. I think security and the organizations I work with, they understand the fundamental need to do that, and they're doing that. That's what I've seen is a trend. And I think where product security is involved, DevOps, that shift is happening rapidly, most rapidly.
Yeah, and I think it's a healthy change too, getting away from this idea that people are going to do security because it's security. Of course you have to do it because we said it's important. You're going to do it, and more this mindset that, no, you need to learn to compromise. You need to sell it. You got to, nothing very few things in security are just 100% you got to do it.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot of airbags and seatbelts in security. It's always,
and it's got to be beautiful. It's got to be. Can you imagine the kind of beautiful, well-designed ads we see when we're at home, and then the kinds of horrible security awareness videos we see in the office? Like, why would I want to do what you're asking me to do? It's like, you either think I'm an idiot or a kid, right? It's almost insulting. When I ask users, what they think about security awareness videos, they immediately grimace or they make really loud sounds. They're like, ugh, they hate it. But we keep feeding it to them because we hope something will convince them, not even convinced, that they'll just do it and leave us alone. We've got to get away from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one more question for you, and we'll wrap up here. I wish we had a full hour, but I know. But we gotta get moving here. Kind of curious if there is anything you can point out. Where do you find your light bulb moments most often with clients? Is there a particular topic or a way that you lay things out that makes things click with them? If they've been really looking at things the wrong way, do you have kind of go-tos that help people get to that point to where they can start, where maybe they don't need your advice on a day-to-day, they can check in maybe weekly and they're heading in the right direction? I thought I just asked a really thoughtful question.
You did. You stumped her, man. You stumped her. You scared her away.
That was a really good question.
And what's funny is I was considering rapping there.
Well, now's a good opportunity to rap, Adrian.
All right. So I had several. That was like I was choosing between like one of five. So we'll just have to have Jules back on.
Absolutely.
That's all there is.
We'll bring her back on soon.
That was an almost perfect place to wrap. Yeah, I should have just wrapped there. So, Jules, sorry, that happened. Thank you for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. You can learn more about Jules's company, RevolutionCyber, at revolutioncyber.com. Also, she will be speaking at InfoSec World. Listeners can go to securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to save 20% on their digital pass and check out her talk. So stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk identity detection and response with Joseph Salazar from Attivo Networks.
Did you know that 81% of data breaches are caused by weak password security? Keeper Security's easy-to-use password manager platform keeps your passwords safe, easy to share, and out of reach of cybercriminals. Keeper is the leading cybersecurity platform for preventing password-related data breaches and cyber threats. Check out Keeper and get a free 3-year Keeper Password Manager solution when you take a demo of Keeper for Business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Keeper Security. Whether your biggest cybersecurity concern is ransomware, unprotected network devices, zero trust success, or auditing your supply chains, firmware security is critical. Eclipsium's enterprise firmware security platform helps you identify devices and their firmware, verify the integrity of firmware wherever it's used, and fortify firmware throughout active remediation and automated patching. Visit securityweekly.com/Eclipsium to try out Eclipsium or learn more about enterprise firmware security.
And welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on digital pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. And we're back. The second interview here is all about the importance of identity detection and response, or IDR for short. This interview is sponsored by Attivo Networks, and today we've got Joseph Salazar with us to talk about this relatively new area of detection and response. Joseph has over 20 years of military and civilian experience in InfoSec. He's a retired major from the U.S. Army Reserves, where he spent 22 years as a counter-intel agent, intel officer, and cybersecurity officer. He's been a sysadmin, incident response analyst, SOC manager, and has done some computer forensics. And he's currently a technical marketing engineer for Attivo Networks. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's a great background. It's funny because I zero military experience here, but as far as the actual technical stuff and some of the roles you're in, I've had kind of a similar history, and I think a lot of that's going to play into what we're talking about today. So we've seen network, NDR, endpoint, EDR, I've even seen threat, TDR. But you're saying that we need to focus for detection and response on identity as well.
That's correct. And the reason why is because there are a lot of solutions that are out there that focus on all the other assets, and yet identity, and enterprise identity, is one of the most critical assets in an organization because it's how attackers can impersonate somebody, move around, gain access. And yet there aren't, until recently, too much focus. There aren't really too many solutions that focus on identity as an enterprise asset, and it's not a complete strategy, security strategy, if you're not focusing on identity security. And I'm not talking about the mechanisms to authorize somebody. I'm talking about the actual identity as an asset.
Right. Yeah. And I think we've needed to have that conversation for a while, where I think some people are getting there, where the concept of asset is not necessarily something with an IP address or, a computing system, but, code bases can be an asset, data can be an asset. And certainly identity is an asset that's, that can be a very specific thing, like in an IAM system, your identity is definitely an asset in a very technical and real sense in terms of data, and then in more of a, kind of a metaphor, ephemeral sense, your identity stretches across a whole bunch of different systems. And I think that's where some of the complexity comes in here, right? Like how you would gather the information you need to do detection of attacks against an identity and have some kind of response capability.
Yeah, and I think it's people have a misconception about what existing security controls can actually do regarding identity, right? I mean, because we've seen, and I'll bring it up when I show some of the slides later. I mean, we've seen the prevalence of attacks, and a lot of the really successful attacks take advantage of an enterprise identity. It's how SolarWinds happened. It's how a lot of the recent breaches have happened. It's an attacker getting a hold of an enterprise identity, using the privileges available to that identity, moving around and getting where they want to go. And so it's really key, especially now with ransomware attacks on the rise. And ransomware is no longer just smash and grab, try to get as many, try to encrypt as many systems as possible and then go with it and try to get some ransom and a few $100s per system. No, that's not how ransomware works nowadays. Ransomware works by trying to go after your critical infrastructure. It's going to go after your Active Directory. It's going to go after your production databases, anything that you are willing to pay millions of dollars to recover. Patient data from a hospital, for example, that gets encrypted. You're out of luck as a healthcare provider until you can get that data back. So it's, how much more are you willing to pay to get that back versus some endpoint that you can just wipe and start from scratch. And today's ransomware attackers are using advanced tactics that APTs and other advanced attackers have used to steal identities, move around, escalate privileges, find that critical target, find a high value asset, and then encrypt it.
Right. So with EDR, kind of the core of EDR is going to be an agent that sits on an endpoint. The core of NDR is going to be a sensor that sits on a network, usually not in line. It gets some kind of tap or copy of network data. What's kind of the core here for IDR? Where do we capture this data? Where does this system actually live?
So, and I think that's where it would be good for me to go ahead and show the slides. And the reason why I say that is because
go for it.
Identity as an asset isn't just simply, for example, it's not just find something and protect it, right? So let me sort of explain what IDR really is, and the reason why. And let's start first with the whole point behind needing IDR, right? Let's talk a bit about that identity security gap. So attackers target credentials and all the associated privileges and entitlements to get into a network, to access those network resources. And if you just look at these stats, and this is all like recent research, right? This is all recent data. Most of these stats point out that it's all about the credential, and that credential is the key to an identity. And I say identity, not credential, because in the cloud, an identity can be a user, it can be a serverless function, it can be a storage bucket, it can be anything. And so we use the generic term identity rather than credential because identities get entitlements, and those entitlements allow them access to things. That's the permissions or privileges that you get. Now, with valid credentials, with valid identity, attackers can access any system, steal data, they consume resources, they can install ransomware, they can even escalate privileges to unlock other network resources. And this is where the gap in traditional security defenses shows up, right? So typical in-network security controls focus on securing the endpoint and then implementing access controls to prevent unauthorized access into the network, right? That's where you get your least privileges, minimal number of privileges that you need, entitlements that you need to access a resource, right? But until recently, no security controls focus on identities as a critical enterprise asset. And this gap is what attackers are exploiting to steal credentials, impersonate those identities, and gain access. So identity security closes this gap, and it provides continuous visibility and detection for attacks targeting identities, such as stealing credentials from endpoints, exploiting Active Directory exposures, compromising authentication mechanisms like MFA. And yes, there are MFA bypass techniques. So that's the point of identity security. Let's look at the identity as a critical asset and protect that. And that means protecting the mechanisms around the identity. So we're not talking just IAM and PAM. We're talking Active Directory. We're talking where the credentials live in your environment. So let's talk a little bit about IDR. So protecting identities involves several different facets, right? So let's start from the right. Identity Access Management, or IAM. That's responsible for managing, authenticating, and authorizing users to network resources. IAM really is to make that AD admin's job easier, right? Most organizations already have this in place. You are protecting the identity by protecting the access to the resources and the authentication mechanisms, right? But the next piece is visibility to identity exposures across the enterprise, whether it's credentials on the endpoints, vulnerable Active Directory settings or parameters like admin SD holder, ACL, or hidden SIDs, things like that, or even identity risks and entitlements exposures in the cloud. Because again, an identity across the enterprise will have access to on-premises and cloud resources. And then there's the attack detection piece, which is what IDR really focuses on. And that's to try to flag activities trying to exploit identities such as credential theft, maybe a DC sync or a DC shadow attack, or attempts to access key vaults in the cloud and to compromise the certificate. The idea is to detect those activities early enough so that you can stop the attacker before they can get too far. So if you look at that entire gamut, you have access management, protect the mechanisms that and protect the access to the network. You have visibility, find the things that an attacker can exploit and get rid of them. And then you have detection and response. Detect the attacks when attackers do try to exploit those credentials or those identities and stop them before they can get too far. So organizations need all three of these things to actively secure an identity. So let's talk a little bit about visibility. So visibility enables organizations to efficiently understand exposures and attack paths from endpoints to Active Directory and the cloud by giving you insight into these things, right? Exposed passwords, credential attack paths, Active Directory exposures and vulnerabilities, again, like bad settings or parameters that allow an attacker to escalate privileges, and even just exposures and entitlements for over-provisioning in the cloud. Interesting fact, 90% of entitlements never get used, and yet a user ID, an identity, still has them. So imagine an attacker getting a hold of this thing where a user got an entitlement to a resource to use one time, and then they forget to remove it. That attacker now has access to all of those entitlements, 90% of which the user has never used because of an inheritance or belonging to a group. So let's talk about IDR. IDR is all about the organization detecting and responding to identity-based attacks very efficiently, right? So you want to look for credential misuse, privilege escalation, lateral movement. You want to protect credentials, privileges, and the systems that manage them. You want to deflect or detect credential theft and misuse and unauthorized AD queries. Fun fact, as an attacker, when I did red teaming, all I had to get was to get onto one system on an endpoint, and I can enumerate all of Active Directory. I can find every target, find all of the high-value systems, find the credentials that I wanted to steal to escalate to a domain administrator with a tool like Bloodhound or Mimikatz. However, let's just make something clear. It does not replace single sign-on or MFA, and it complements existing EPP and EDR solutions. They have their place. So EPP, EDR, NDR, XDR, TDR, they have their place. IDR is specifically for identities. So here's another thing that most people don't realize is EDR protects endpoints from compromise, but it doesn't protect the identities on that endpoint. So if you're storing a credential in a browser, or you're storing it in the Windows Credential Manager, or the Apple keychain, EDR does not protect that, right? It does not protect the identities on the endpoint. It doesn't prevent an attacker from moving laterally or detecting an attacker using it to access Active Directory. But IDR solutions do. However, the space is still relatively new. So, below are some samples of companies that provide these solutions. So you have Tenable, and they're in the space because they acquired a company called Alcid, which is a European company. CrowdStrike is in the space because they recently acquired a company called Preempt. And then there's Attivo Networks, which offers several solutions focused on identity security. So all of these, the space is growing as people realize that identity as a critical enterprise asset is something they need to focus on protecting. So this is a good place to stop. Any questions on what I just showed you?
Yeah,
that's a. Yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
Sorry to jump on you there, Adrian. So, quick question or two for you, Joe. Talk to me a little bit. The way I understand what you've discussed is it's more about focusing on the use, behaviors, actions at an identity-centric level, as opposed to looking at it from a endpoint-centric, network-centric, or app-centric level. Is that a good way of just kind of summarizing a 30,000-foot view?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Focus on the identity as an asset that you need to protect rather than looking at it from the endpoint view or from the network view, right? Because an attacker needs an identity to access anything in the network. It's how they get around. It's how they can move laterally. It's how they can identify targets. The identity is a critical component to any major attack. And so why not protect it as such?
Yep. Yep, totally agree. So then from a detection, visibility, observation, and analysis vantage point, the data you collect will be all centered around permission requests, usage of permissions, elevations of permissions, activities that would be centered, say, on, I guess, actions that are not in the norm. Is that a good way to think of the identity from the vantage point of the data we collect to then analyze to then provide protections around?
Well, so one thing is that we don't collect data to do this type of detection. At least a lot of the IDR solutions will look at it two ways. First of all is the visibility piece. So the visibility piece is finding out what you're actually vulnerable to. And to do that, you do things like Active Directory assessments. And we're not talking an audit, right? Because audits only find specific things and they're only looking for specific things. When we talk about assessments, we're looking at different things. We're looking at what is vulnerable in your Active Directory that an attacker can use. So let's pull up some examples. There is an access control list called admin SD holder. Admin SD holder controls access to all built-in objects within an Active Directory controller. That includes things like the domain admins group. So an attacker can add an ID, a user ID, any user ID, no matter the type of user, to the admin SD holder access control list if they have right access to it. And with that access, they can now add anybody to the domain admin group and you would never know. Let's talk about a hidden SID attack. A hidden SID is when you add a security identifier, a SID, to an existing account. So an attacker would go and look for a disabled admin account. Like typically the default admin account is going to have a SID and it's going to end in -500 in Active Directory. So all the attacker has to do is look for that disabled account, add that SID to an existing user account as a hidden SID, and then act as a domain admin. He doesn't belong to a domain admins group, but he has all the rights and privileges of a domain admin. How are you going to find that? Those are the types of weaknesses we're talking about.
Okay. So it's more centered around the management systems, the operational technology tools that run the identity components, as opposed to looking for behavioral action.
Yes, we're focusing on the systems that actually implement identity within the environment. And so that's the visibility piece. The other side of that is the detection and response, right? And detection and response is important because even if you reduce the exposure to the minimal you need to operate, you're still going to, as a business, accept certain risks by having certain high-value accounts with high-value privileges. You can't get rid of all your domain admins. Even if you separate the user accounts to have a regular user account and then a domain admin account, which is, typical good, that's just good policy, and that's just good, proper way of doing things, keeping an admin account secure from a regular user account, right? Even if you still have that, you're accepting the risk that domain admin account is not going to get compromised. So what you need now is you need to find a way to detect when an attacker is attempting to compromise those high privileged accounts. And that's where the detection and response piece in IDR comes in, right? You need to be able to find and identify credential theft, privilege escalation, any type of discovery on Active Directory that could indicate that someone is data mining AD to find those privileged accounts, service accounts, shadow admin accounts, because that's one of the biggest headaches that an organization can have from a security perspective is shadow admins, right? Delegated permissions, delegated privileges on accounts that give them admin-like privileges without actually being an admin, right? The ability to change a user's password is huge. I, as an attacker, I get a hold of someone that has the change password delegated right. He's not an admin, but he can change any user password. I'll just find a DBA, change their password, and then look at all of the data that's on that database. So you need to find some way to detect those activities.
So a few questions about how, I guess, functionally you go through implementing this product. Is there any, as part of the deployment, does the product, you said it doesn't do an audit, but do you look for any, does it discover, settings, configurations that are, not best practices or things that typically get people in trouble? Are you looking for things that have already happened, or is it something where once it's in place, it's looking, that those detections from that point on are looking for activity that looks fishy?
Okay, so I can speak generally about other products, but there are certain things that are specific to our product in the IDR space. So when I start referring to that, it's I don't want to pump up the product. I want to talk about the the category of IDR, but there are certain things that only we do. So from my perspective, and my product is, our product is the only one that I have experience with. When we do an assessment, so let's talk about the visibility piece first. When we do an assessment, what we're looking for is existing misconfigurations, parameters, settings in Active Directory that attacker can exploit. So we call those exposures. Right, and so other products will do a certain number of checks to look for exposures. We do approximately 200 different checks to look for approximately 70 exposures, which I think is at or near the top of the list of the total number of exposures that actually people look at. Other solutions do, and then we will identify those as whether they're high, medium, or low risks. Right, and then depending on how you want to do it, you can schedule it to run as often as you want. You can schedule it to run ad hoc whenever you want to. And every time we get a new assessment, we'll identify new exposures, and we will identify, whether an exposure has been cleared or not when it disappears from the list. And so the idea is to keep that continuous visibility on Active Directory so that the exposures don't get out of hand. But the other part of that is detecting when something is happening in the environment that shows up on the domain controller. And that's when you have live attack detection, which is, I think, something only we do on the domain controller, at least. And actually, I think we're the only ones who do Active Directory attack detection at the endpoint, but I may not be correct on that. So, if you get mass changes, like you see sudden mass account lockouts or things of that nature, that could be indicative of a brute force attack. Right, you'd like to know about that, right? Before you start getting calls from users saying, "Hey, my account's locked out. What's going on?" Right, and those tend to be delayed quite a bit, versus getting an immediate alert that, "Hey, we just had about 30 accounts get locked out in this OU. You should probably check it out right now." Right, so do the assessment and then continually monitor for any changes that could make your life harder, that an attacker could take advantage of, and then look for signs that the attacker is actually trying to do something within your environment. So that's an example of one of our offerings doing that identity detection and the visibility piece as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of my big frustrations about when I used to be a pen tester is that I often felt like the clients would focus on the wrong things. So they would focus on maybe the exploit that I used to get in. We need to patch that vulnerability. Sure, but you also should have seen when I turned off AV on all these systems, I created a domain admin account. I was logging into all these other, like all that activity, like nobody noticed that it happened. Like that's kind of a bigger problem because there'll be a new thing that's not patched tomorrow. You need to be able to see this stuff going on.
Yeah, and that's really the funny part because when we start talking about AD queries from the endpoint, right? I mean, an AD query, only certain people should be doing AD queries, right? I mean,
right, manual ones, absolutely.
You're an admin, you're going to be doing AD queries, right? But a regular user in HR or finance shouldn't be running PowerShell or command line and running nltest/dsgetDC to get a list of all the domain controllers that are in the environment. They should never be doing that. And
that's the frustrating thing, right? Like every time we see ransomware, they delete shadow copies. Like there's certain things that the attacker has to do to get their outcome, to get to their goal, that we know they're going to do. So why don't we have detection set up for it?
Yeah, and part of that is the trickiness. Right? It's like, how many EDR platforms or solutions or agents do you know that can actually detect someone typing nltest space/dsgetDC in a command line?
Yeah, we're just starting to test XDR solutions right now. So I'll let you ask me that question again in a month.
I can tell you that very few of them do, because it's part and parcel of how Active Directory works, right? A regular domain joined system has full access to query Active Directory. It's how Active Directory works, right? They need access to AD, or else they can't function. How else are they going to check to see if a service account is authorized access using a service principal name, right? To authorize access to that ID or that user or that service, right? You need the regular systems to talk to Active Directory. So an attacker that's running a query is gonna blend into the background, right? So unless you're looking for that specific type of activity and you have ways of detecting that type of activity, it's very difficult to detect it. And so, we've got one way of doing that. Other organizations, vendors are looking for different ways to do it. But we can honestly say that since we've deployed our technology in pen tests and red team exercises, the blue team hasn't lost. So,
that's very good to be able to say, because one of the observations I've been making lately, like looking through how some of these extortion campaigns occur, they really look like, we used to say pen tests weren't as useful because pen testers would emulate other pen testers, not adversaries. But
yes.
Now, like the folks that these ransomware crews are hiring are trained pen testers. Like they went through the same pen tester training that other folks did. They probably have certifications and stuff in pen testing, and these look like garden variety pen tests. So here we are. We came full circle.
Yes. Well, and the interesting part is that, from a detection and response standpoint, right, if you're looking at identity as an asset and you're looking specifically for solutions that protect identity as an asset, right, which is something you should be doing, the attacker really loses major leverage, right? If they can't access an identity, if they can't, for example, use something like Bloodhound to extract objects from Active Directory and identify the shortest path to a domain admin. If they can't do that, and that's in the discovery phase of the attack, where are they going to go from there? Right? Without an identity, an attacker has very limited options to penetrating a network.
So when you work with clients, with customers, is there a hardening phase of this? Is that a piece of this? Is IDR, is that part of IDR is doing some hardening, tightening up those identities, or is it more just focused on, the attack side of things?
No. So the IDR is the attack side of things, but the visibility piece, which is part of identity security, identity protection, that's important as well, right? So when you're doing the assessments, the idea is to identify those exposures and get rid of them before an attacker can take advantage of them. When you do an assessment in your lateral movement path from the endpoints, you want to remove all of the credentials that are stored there that you don't need to be stored there. Like an admin storing a credential on a regular endpoint is a big no-no. A domain admin doing that, that's a big no-no, right? But people do it out of convenience. So if you can reduce the attack paths from the endpoints, if you can reduce your attack surface exposure within Active Directory or in the cloud, if you can dial back the entitlements that a particular identity has in a cloud environment so that they only have the minimal number that they need to do their job and nothing more, that 90% of those entitlements that they never use, you're hardening your environment. You are reducing the addressable attack surface that an attacker can target so that they have fewer targets to go after. And then the IDR piece, which is the detection and response piece, that's when the IDR piece kicks in. That's when you now start actively looking for an attack activity that's targeting identities. So the few identity exposures and entitlement risks that you now have a way to detect when an attacker is attempting to exploit them.
So I'm sitting here wondering, as you talk about the hardening and the different attack vectors and how things can be exploited, which are all really awesome, if the average client of yours is at the same level of knowledge, or if you had to create training programs just to tell them how to properly secure things, so they actually understand what threats you're talking about and how this all ties together.
Oh, I wish I could pull up the console and show you right now. Here's the thing. We put a lot of help into our product so that if you don't know what a particular Active Directory exposure is, you click a details tab. We'll tell you of the full description of the exposure, the MITRE attack tactic that takes advantage of that, all the tools that are available to exploit it, plus how you can remediate it, as well as technical references on exactly why it's an issue on every single of these 70 or so exposures we have. So we put a lot of help into, at least from the visibility side. And then on the threat path side, the lateral attack path side, all of that is again, there's help available everywhere within our environment. And we do have professional services that can help you set all of that up if you want to and give you training. But the goal here is that, for most security people, once you point out, hey, here's the issue, here are the details, here's the remediation steps, they know where to go from there. And once they've done it a few times, it becomes simple. We actually just did. We're prepping for a webinar, and we did an assessment with the CISO who had had doing their due diligence, they do audits, they report to the board that, hey, yes, my Active Directory is secure. And when we started going through the assessment results, he found major gaps, and he's like, I didn't know this was happening. I mean, the admins know that they weren't supposed to be doing this thing, which is like accept an authentication from something within their finding, and said, and I've reported to my board that they're not doing this, and yet here I see proof that they're doing it, right? And so he was surprised at the level of findings. We had a customer who had just done an audit and then brought us in, to do the demo for our product. And he said, he's like, I'm pretty confident you won't find anything. We just did an audit. We found 170 different findings that he was not aware of. Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and when I say 170 different findings, we're talking about exposures that identified multiple issues. So a single exposure identified like 15 or 20 different issues that he had. Right. And
Joe,
it's not difficult once you point them out, once you point to what they need to do for them to realize, hey, this is something I need to take steps to protect, and then to come up with a means, once we show them how to do it, to do that protection themselves.
Right. I was gonna, Joe, we're never getting rid of Active Directory, are we?
No, we're not. We're not.
Guess we'll have to secure it.
Well, as much as people want to move away from Active Directory, the reality is that over 90% of Global 1000 businesses use it. 90%.
Yeah,
it's not going anywhere.
Pretty sticky, about as sticky a product as you can get. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, right. And if you consider where Microsoft started and what the key directory service was available at the time, and then for them to now have domain dominance, essentially, I mean, they have dominance of the market with Active Directory. It's actually rather remarkable, and yet, it's still one of the most insecure things I've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Attivo Networks to learn more. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/extrahop.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We've got keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our rockstar lineup. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And now on to the Enterprise Security Weekly news. All right. I feel like I'm talking faster just because we had Joe on the last segment.
He was moving. He was definitely high speed.
I feel like I need to compete. I need to speed up my.
No, you just talk to me. I'm nice and slow.
Yeah.
So, where do you want to start?
I think we will make it easy on Gus and go in order.
Wow.
If because we try and put the timestamps in there, and I sort it in a specific order. So why not? So the first one, I've got I think I've got all the fundings in order of biggest to smallest. And the first one I think is I've got it labeled as funding, but it's also a trend. So cyber insurance firms that are also actively building, selling, implementing security tools. So they're essentially kind of like MDR firms or security platform firms. I'm guessing maybe they're white labeling a lot of this stuff, but in this case, we're talking about a firm called Coalition, who got a 205 million Series E, and they're valued at 3.5 billion. And this is in the last maybe 18 months, they've raised $500 million.
Crazy. That's crazy. 890 million valuation to 3.5 billion valuation in a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely insane. Like, how much revenue growth do you have to get that? And maybe they've got that revenue growth. I don't know. That's crazy growth.
I think it's something that, knee-jerk response. I don't want to like an insurance company that's also selling me, products to make my security better. But at the same time, like, who's better incentivized, to make sure you don't have a breach so that they don't have to pay out a policy. But then on the other side, as the customer, how can they come back and tell me, oh, we're not going to pay this out, like your security sucked? I'm like, you're my security. Like, you put it there. Like, I feel
certainly
like I
makes
have
it hard
some
to fight.
confidence that they'd at least pay out the policy, right?
Yeah. So the question I have on this one, though, you said insurance companies that have products. What's your thoughts, Adrian, on product companies that insure their product, the efficacy of their product? Is that the same thing, or is there enough of a subtle difference?
No. I think it's very similar. It's basically putting money where your mouth is and saying, hey, we believe in this strongly enough, that will, help if it puts you in a financial bind because of some failure of our product. So it's maybe
not, because I would agree with you in the sense that if the company themselves are putting up that money, but if they're just outsourcing it as a third-party risk policy, they're getting essentially options on that, right? They're paying dollars to millions or pennies to dollars to ensure the percentage chance that occurs, right? So yes, they're putting some money behind it, but it's not as deep as one might think.
And if you look at some of those those security product warranties that are basically backed by a cyber insurance policy, there's some fine print. You definitely want to check out that fine print on where and how that thing is paid out. Like, in some cases, I've seen it. Like, if you manage it yourself, it's basically invalid. Like it's only valid if you're using the MDR services that they provide, where they manage the product fully themselves. So yeah, I thought that was it's an interesting trend, and I don't think it's necessarily a negative trend. I think we're still early enough in cybersecurity that we need more people trying different approaches.
Yeah, I definitely don't have
They did acquire Binary Edge, so I know at least some of their stuff isn't white labeled. They acquired an attack surface management vendor in early 2020. I don't know anything about the rest of it, though. But if you look at what they've got, I mean, it's almost like a trust wave where they've got a little of everything.
Yeah, I think Arcos Labs did something recently, too, where they did a $1 million, I'm trying to type it as we speak here, I think it was $1 million guarantee or $1 million insurance kind of thing as well. Yeah, they announced a $1 million credential stuffing warranty, which is exactly like you say, putting your mouth where your product is, right? If your product doesn't stand up to the credential stuffing attack in the sense of Arcos Labs, right? They're gonna pay out, and sure, it's limited to $1 million, which in an enterprise may not be 1/10 or 1/100th of the potential impact of a credential stuffing attack, but at least there's something there. At least there's some value being provided to back up what they have.
And we've got somebody from Cyber Insurance scheduled to come on the show. In fact, Jeffrey Smith, who's the person coming on, he partnered with Jeremiah Grossman on some of those warranties that Jeremiah Grossman did, I think, for White Hat Security and for SentinelOne when he was at SentinelOne.
I mean, I love the idea. If we could get some more consistency around it without the fine print that makes it a scary proposition for customers, there could be value around that.
Yeah. Some of these others don't want to spend too much time on unless you see something interesting here. Feel free to jump in. But PanaRaise raised $42 million. That's a cyber risk management platform provider.
Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about them.
No. Yeah, me neither. Senson, I mean, I've heard the name, and this is actually because I don't know a whole lot about this. This is a product category that we're going to kind of dive into. These kind of, I don't know if this is a SaaS-based one, but risk management platforms in general. So looking forward to learning more about these. Much like how the rays of the sun illuminate everything they touch, PanaRaise was designed to bring visibility into previously unseen elements of supplier cyber risk. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, what about JScrambler? JScrambler. I mean,
yeah, JScrambler is interesting. So it's like a client-side security product. Basically, protecting against bots and JavaScript attacks against JavaScript, stuff like that. Stuff that really attack the users of the product.
I mean, it looks like they're encoding or otherwise, locking down any scripts so that if you try and mess with them on the way, it won't happen. But interesting.
They do some obfuscation. Also,
yeah, a little concerned about their claims about what they say the default or best solution for that. I was kind of like, say what? But what they're doing is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's not super new ground. Again, this is not a space that I'm really savvy on. Tyler might know more about it, because I think it's somewhat tangential to the space you used to be in when you were at Signal Sciences. The whole
it's actually closer. It's my understanding it was originally JScrambler was originally closer to more of the AppSec code obfuscation side, and I believe they're moving more towards the runtime style protections with protections for MageCart and other data exfiltration type things, and that's where they've extended their platform. So I would say it started in one thing. They've added and pivoted to additional product lines, which allow them to do more runtime detection and blocking of client-side style attacks, which puts them more into, say, bot protection, some of the similar things to Arcos Labs, bot protection, credential stuffing, and those kinds of protections. So, yeah, it's an interesting market, this kind of in-app protection market or online fraud market. It's definitely a hot and growing area. But good for them, for picking up the money that they did. Getting that funding round of $15 million on such a small project is great.
Yeah. So we've also got Senson in here. They raised $20 million. And again, this is pretty early days. I haven't seen the product yet. I think they actually, is this the one where they have a free trial where you can just jump right into it? I think it might be. So looking forward to checking it out, but almost gives me kind of an XDR kind of feel, where they're trying to, do a better job of pulling out interesting insights and things like that from your products.
Is this Senson.io, that one, or .com? Because
yes,
.com
not
is,
.com. .com is a completely different company.
This is killing me with these whole TLDs now. The .io and .com, you have the same damn company, and they both happen to be in cyber. .com is a keyless protection system, so it's a physical security system.
I don't know why you go forward with the branding when you're going to have to compete, and like 50% of people are going to go to the wrong website. Like I don't even know how you get this.
As a marketer, I 100% wouldn't do that. But sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes you get stuck. Like if we talk about Jupiter One, a funny story about Jupiter One. There's a band called Jupiter One. So we actually had to fight from a brand perspective, and they're fairly well known. They had a couple of hits. If you Google them, they actually have a hit. I'm sure you'll recognize.
You had to fight from a band perspective. Is that what you said?
I did. I had to fight against the
brand perspective.
Brand and band perspective. But no, we actually had to take their Twitter feed from them. We actually had to do a copyright. We had to trademark our brand and do a full copyright press against Twitter for them to release the Jupiter One band's Twitter feed to us. So we recently took that over. But to answer your question, sometimes you just don't know. Like I don't, I didn't brand Jupiter One. I came in later on, but you just bump into these collisions sometimes. It's not always the easiest thing to deal with. But anyways, long story too long, these, Senson seems to be the, this kind of holistic cyber defense platform, automating threat detection, investigation, response. The website looks a little bit, I do everything for everybody. So it's going to be interesting to see how they can figure out their position and make it a very direct position that people will want to get involved with and buy.
Yeah. Battle of the brands.
Yeah. Battle of the bands, battle of the brands. I see what you did there, Adrian. Well played.
Yep. It was right there. I had to take it.
I lobbed it up for you. You got it.
So I'm not sure how to pronounce this brand, but Exin. I think they're Italian. Raised 6 million euros and going after a very familiar topic for you and me, Tyler. Going after getting IoT devices maintained and firmware updated and stuff like that.
Yeah, the question is, how are they doing it? Are they doing it outside in, detection based? Are they doing it, some kind of, is it within the hardware itself? I'm guessing it's an outside in kind of play.
I don't see any way to, and this is a huge problem. So I'm testing vulnerability management right now, and almost every major vulnerability scanner out there doesn't know what to do with IoT devices. They don't know what they are. They say, oh, it looks like embedded Linux, and that's about it. And I don't see any way to do this where somebody or a lot of somebodies are probably going to have to duplicate this effort where they go through and catalog every single IoT device, whether they're, like here in my case, in my lab, they're Ubiquiti network devices. And yes, they're running Linux. And yes, it looks like Debian, but they are very not managed like Debian Linux servers. They get their own patches, their own models, their own firmware. And so does every line of medical devices and, everything else you can imagine in this IoT space. And they're all going to have, different firmware numbering systems, different places to download the firmware. It's a lot of legwork, just categorizing all that stuff, cataloging it, and writing detections for it so you can detect those devices. But I don't see any other way to do it. Somebody's going to have to sit down and do all that work.
Yeah, good. The only thing that pops out to me is, could we do something that's crowdsourced, right? And kind of outsource, hey, new device, submit it. What's the fingerprints look like from an outside-in perspective, and figure out a way to crowdsource the detections, right? And maybe that's the thing that Rumble could do, or some of these vuln scanners could potentially do. But if Nmap hasn't done it over the last 20 years, is it even possible?
Yeah, so Rumble is the only one really scratching the surface there. When I run Rumble, it not only knows that these are Ubiquiti devices, it's the only product in the entire security space I've seen that even does that much. But it knows how to pull the model number and the firmware number off of the device because there's a proprietary service where you can grab that. So the vendor on their end, they've actually made it pretty easy to catalog and identify this device. But the vendors making the asset management, the scanning tools need to know it's there, how to query it, and write that piece.
Yep. In looking at the XN or XEN or however you pronounce it website, they say ML-driven firmware security solution. XEN Core uses neural networks to learn the expected behavior of a device and uses this understanding to constantly monitor its functioning and protect it from cyber threats, both known and unknown. So it looks like it's doing some kind of analytical fingerprinting on actions, data in, data out. It's a combo platter of detection-based things. It looks like it's not something that they're going to install inside of devices or at the firmware level, from an SDK perspective, or finding ways to have firmware use their code directly. So it's got to be an external in type of view. And how is that different than any of the other behavioral analytical tools that we've seen over time? We're just targeting an ICS or an IoT device, right? How is that different than anything else?
So this is active defense that sits on the IoT firmware. I had this all wrong.
Yeah, and just taking a peek at the XEN website under the technology stuff, that's what it looks like. But I'm not sure how that's differentiated in an ICS approach.
Because when I was reading the other article, I was pretty certain it was something they wanted you to embed with your SDK, so it was running in the IoT device itself with those, with those services. And I was worried.
And that would be wicked.
It would be, except for overhead. I mean,
yeah.
Then
getting
again,
the world to adopt it.
Yeah, it would be kind of cool. Really cool.
Yeah, so I mean, stuff like this has been around for a while. There was who is it? BlackBerry. I think built some stuff around this. There have been vendors out there for a while building basically host intrusion prevention stuff. Active detection prevention of threats. Made to be baked into firmware, and I just haven't seen a whole lot of companies go after that, because often they don't have to. People buying these IoT devices aren't demanding that kind of security baked into the firmware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would love to get them on and get an interview of them. I would love to hear them talk about what they do in depth, so that we don't mutilate their value proposition like we are potentially doing right now.
Maybe there's a reason they're in Europe and not in the US, and maybe because of that, they'll have more success than folks over here have.
Let's hope. I mean, it's innovative anyways.
Yeah.
Yep. So PE firm invested in EC Council, the folks that do the certified ethical hacker cert. They're probably best known for that. So that was kind of interesting. We have seen more deals around some of the industries that don't sell products but kind of rotate around cybersecurity. So I guess we've got kind of a trend going on there. And anybody touching security has like a golden sheen, I guess.
Print money
for some of these firms. And LG, who has almost completely gotten out of smartphones, is acquiring an automotive cybersecurity startup called Cybellum for $250 million.
Yeah, Tel Aviv based, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to
Gold Star when I see that name.
Oh yeah,
that was their old brand.
Oh really? Okay.
Gold Star became LG.
Gotcha. Oh really? I didn't know that. I've had Gold Star appliances, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Life's good.
So I'm going to connect the Cybellum to the previous discussion of the XEN stuff. And looking at the Cybellum website, their headline is Product Security Lifecycle Management is a global leader providing integrated cyber solutions for leading device manufacturers. Isn't this very close potentially to firmware?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's just more vertical specific.
Well, on their website, they have a Cybellum Automotive, Cybellum Medical, Cybellum Industrial. So it sounds like they've got a broad platform that actually did some of this stuff. And from a customer perspective, Land Rover, Jaguar, Audi, I think those are all the same brand. That might be kind of cheating. Renault.
Yeah, Tata.
Yeah, exactly. Nissan. So it looks like they got adopted quickly, but it was an attempt at doing hardware level product security from what I see on their website.
Right. Yeah. It seems like they're particularly interested in the automotive side of it, though.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, it doesn't matter anyways. They've been picked up. They're off the table, and they're going to be working for somebody else at this point. So, and it sounds like by that press release that what they wanted to tout is the automotive side of that.
Right. So OneTrust acquired Tugboat Logic to automate InfoSec assurance and certification. So very interesting space here. We've got another one we're going to talk about here. Basically, as I understand Tugboat Logic, there's a bunch of companies now that try and automate part of the like SOC 2 certification process.
Mm-hmm. So here's my take on that one, because Tugboat and Jupiter One compete occasionally. That is not that market is not a market. It's more of a feature. Meaning it's probably a market if you're willing to do small size deals with frequent lower size deals with frequent higher frequency of selling, right? Kind of a different go-to-market motion. And that seemed to be a good market for Tugboat Logic. Vanta plays in there. There's a couple other players. I see these guys rolling up into the bigger cyber asset management players like Jupiter One, like Axonius, like others that have, a compliance section of what they do on a broader platform, right? Because really, what is compliance but knowing what you have, looking for evidence in real time against what you have, and then answering questions, i.e. do I have any buckets, S3 buckets externally accessible, or do I have any permissions that are out of whack, right? Whatever the audit requirements are. And that really comes down to knowing what you have at any given moment in time, which is a subset of the cyber asset market. So I think that's why you saw them get acquired. I don't remember the number that they got acquired for. I want to say 160, but I'm not sure. That could be just my memory failing me. But yeah, it's good for them, right? Good for them for getting a healthy exit, doing well, and landing in a place that I think they're going to continue to grow and be meaningful inside of OneTrust.
Yep. Yeah, I did not see a number for that deal. Did not see a deal size there.
Yeah, don't quote me on that number then. I'm probably making it up.
So next one, you'll want to actually click the link on this one and check that out. But so this is kind of the other side of it. Like if you can automate pulling all this stuff, what about automating, making it easy for people to find and to access? So Crossbeam has used a product called SafeBase to basically set up a live security page that for customers can log in and actually click and download, or at least it looks like they'd be able to click and download a copy of their SIG, their pen test report, their latest vulnerability results, and basically see the status of all their security and compliance stuff.
I think this is such a unique, really cool, transparent approach to cybersecurity for an enterprise. Because every enterprise out there, including the one I work for, is constantly being asked by customers, do you have these statuses? Do you have these reports? Do you have this level of security? And basically, you can just point them here and say, yep, you want to deep dive in it, we're happy to deep dive, but this is a constantly updated, real-time demonstration of our state of security. Obviously, there's some risks in that, because what happens if all of a sudden you put your access control panel up there and it says password security broken or login security broken?
It goes red. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that just might be begging for attacks in real time. But, I think fundamentally this is a good high-level way of pointing customers to it. And I think in the top it says login to private page. Maybe this is it's a private page for all customers have access to it and all prospects, something like that.
I suspect the public version of this might be more static than it looks. It might not be entirely dynamic where it could just go red at any time, But
yeah, good question. But I think in theory, I like the idea. I think it's a really interesting way of surfacing the content.
But yeah, so SafeBase is the one that makes the tool that does this, and I've already talked to several other CISOs that say that they're actively working on the same thing. CISOs who work for vendors, for product companies. So it's looking like this is a pretty quick moving trend.
Yeah, well, I think every company should at least look into potentially buying it, or at least building something of their own.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to cut down on overhead for sales facing folks, right? It's one of the most common questions you get. How do you do security? Can you send me a copy of your X, Y, and Z?
Yep, for sure.
All right, so the next one is really just something for listeners, readers to go off and check out. It's in the show notes, but basically, CB Insights always puts out some really good stuff. They have really interesting stats and things like that. Interesting insight into the different markups, startup markets here. And they've got a collection of 386 startup failures, postmortems, basically. And always interesting to scroll through. And there's even a single security company in there. I still feel like, I think one of the stats they've got is 70%, of upstart tech companies fail, usually around 20 months after first raising financing, with around 1.3 million in total funding closed before they fail. I don't, Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think security is like that. I think security kind of bucks that trend, and it's at least flips that number, where it's a much smaller portion that just kind of fail and disappear. I mean, we've seen some bad exits, but even a bad security company still gets an exit, right?
100%. I think that's why you see such an overinvestment in cyber, is because the return on invested capital tends to be at least break even on many, many deals. Certainly once they're de-risked, say at the A level. I know and talk to plenty of companies that never get seed or can't get from seed to A. Like, that's common. But once you start hitting the A-B level, you're going to at least generally break even on most of them, which is why everybody, all the cyber investors out there, literally beat the hell out of each other trying to get these deals. So really neat. I'm going to dive into that Rubica story. I really would like to hear what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems almost like a messaging issue, messaging and a market positioning issue.
Well, if you read several descriptions and still can't say what they did, I think you identified a problem.
Yeah, no, definitely. Be interesting to dive into later, but like to hear your feedback on that. But we are at our squirrel story for today. Trying to figure out like what kind of story I'm looking for, what I want to pull from. But for this week, I'm hoping you haven't read this and you haven't heard much about Amazon's device announcements. And I wanted to do kind of like a bluff the listener game. If you've ever listened to Wait, Don't Tell Me.
I have not, but tell me the rules. I'm in for the game.
Yeah, so the rules are I'm going to give you 3 products, and we're going to do a couple rounds of this. 2 are completely fake. I've made them up, or maybe not completely fake, but they're not a product that Amazon came out with. Maybe they're a product that exists somewhere, and one of the 3 is real. You got to pick the real one.
I love it. Let's go. Secret squirrel time.
All right. Earlier this week, Amazon announced A, a smart laundry hamper with soil level detection, B, a smart thermostat, or C, a smart cuckoo clock.
I think I know my answer, but I think I'm going to punt and see if Lee is still listening to the descriptions, or if he had to drop off. You still there, Lee?
Yeah, Lee had to go.
Dang it! All right, I got to take one for the team here.
Hot seat. All right,
hit me again. I heard dirty laundry. I heard thermostat.
Yeah, dirty
thermostat.
laundry.
What's the third
thermostat? Cuckoo clock.
I'm going thermostat clock to compete with Google Nest products.
You got it. Nailed it. I intentionally made the first one easy, though. Yeah.
Yes, you got to get harder with these. Come on, if we're going to do some squirrel stuff, give me something challenging.
So the cuckoo clock is actually real, but didn't make it. So Amazon has a program where people will vote on like early versions of products, And I forget what they call the program, but the smart cuckoo clock was actually an option, but people didn't vote for it. Unsurprisingly.
Really. I bet you people just didn't have the time.
All right, next round. Earlier this week, Amazon announced a portable game console that can play PC games. That's A. B, a home security camera that flies around your house and looks for threats. Or C, a line of Alexa-enabled smart refrigerators.
Oh. It's got to be C all day long.
Incorrect. It is a smart, it's a drone that flies around your house.
like a fly,
drone.
like just buzzing around your house and filming stuff it thinks is risky.
Yeah, just like patrolling your house.
Oh, I'm buying
with
that
the camera on it.
I'm going to order one of those, and we'll see it on a later episode of ESW. You'll see it back here somewhere.
At some point, there will be a GIF of someone swinging a baseball bat at one of those.
Too funny.
All right. Earlier this week, Amazon announced A, a robotic vacuum, B, a robotic pet fish that lives and swims in a real water-filled aquarium, or C, a robot that follows you around in case you maybe have a question or something.
I think I saw this one, and I think it's C, and it actually has a camera attached to its head.
Correct. A camera that extends 4 feet up telescopically.
Yeah, that's the one I saw.
That's not 4 feet. I'm taller than that. 4 feet's more like that.
That's the one I saw, and I was like, it looks like a Wall-E thing with an extending periscope or something.
Yep. Yeah, basically. It's I forget what they call it. It's
that too will be something I will waste my money on someday.
Yeah, a lot of these are invite only, so it's really still testing phases. Like you can get one if you get selected. If you put your name in the hat. But
hey, we're important influencers in the market. Why are we not being selected? Come on.
Well, you got to put your name in the hat first.
Well, let's put our names in there. Come on.
All right, I'm game. It reminds me, Sony used to sell a robotic dog called Ibo. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, that thing was stupid. I remember that.
Cost a couple grand or something like that. It was smart enough 20 years ago, I want to say, to like go back and find its charger and lay down on its charger. And this one works the same way.
Yeah, but neither one of them can fetch me a beer, so I'm out.
This has cup holders built into its rump. It can't put anything into cup holders. But if you have somebody else that can put a beer in the cup holder, it can technically bring.
Sorry, the value prop's not there. I could just have somebody else bring me the beer.
Yeah, that's maybe a third party opportunity. A robot that fills up the Astro with whatever you want brought to you.
I love it.
It's called Astro. Astro is the name of the robot.
Gotcha. Named after
that will be a new thing that you can yell on a podcast like this or through someone's phone to trigger in somebody's house and make it do something stupid.
Hey Astro, fetch me a beer.
All right, one more and we're done. Earlier this week, Amazon announced Alexa-enabled hotel rooms, plans to start building brick-and-mortar bookstores nationwide, or a driverless car prototype.
That's the hotel room.
Did you see that one also?
I did not. It's the only one that made sense to me, though. I don't see them competing with Tesla or some of these other autonomous cars. They're too far behind. And what was the middle one? The middle. Oh, the bookstore. That's like no way. Because all the old bookstore. I can't find a bookstore within 100 miles of where I live. I highly doubt they're going to want to get into that market.
So they actually have built a couple, but they haven't gone nationwide. They do have some brick and mortar. They do have some brick and mortar stores, and they have talked about going nationwide with that. I mean, this is a company that owns Whole Foods, right? Like they've already got brick and mortar retail countrywide.
Yeah, I just don't think that people buy physical books to the quantity that they used to anymore, and it'll just be a shrinking number, so I wouldn't see them entering it. But who knows? I've been wrong many, many times this week alone.
I've got a Barnes & Noble next to me, and it stays pretty full, and I hope it doesn't go away because I still enjoy wandering around a bookstore personally. Call me
They closed the one here.
Oh, yeah. But yeah. So Disney and Amazon partner on a custom voice assistant, Hey Disney, and Echo rollout to Walt Disney World Resort hotels. So you got 2 of the 4. Very good.
Hey, all right. 50% is better than I did in college.
And I mean, it's crazy stuff these days. It's like, trying to guess what some of these tech companies are going to come out with. Who knows? All right. Thanks so much, Tyler. And thank you to Lee, who's already dropped off, for joining me today. And big thanks to everyone for watching and listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.